One thing we do a lot in classrooms is get our learners to read and listen to dialogues. And quite right too, because it's through exposure to good dialogues that our learners get a lot of their contact with the English language, and in particular with features of spoken conversational language. But I sometimes wonder if we really use dialogues enough. I mean, do we and our learners get as much out of dialogues as we could? Of course, we want learners to read dialogues first and foremost for their content, to find out what the dialogue tells them and to respond to the content too. But dialogues, and indeed other kinds of texts as well, are often full of useful lexis, lots of vocabulary, lots of expressions. Now, we don't want to squeeze a dialogue dry like a wet sponge, but I think we also don't want to get learners to just read a dialogue, answer some questions, and then just leave it behind. Here's a simple idea to draw learner attention to at least some language in a dialogue that they might otherwise just read, understand, but not really pay any attention to in terms of the lexical content. Here you can see a dialogue taken from a course book. In fact, it's part of a dialogue that's used to introduce a unit which, amongst other things, works with the present perfect tense. Now, let's assume that during your lesson, your learners have read the dialogue, probably listened to it, and answered some comprehension questions, perhaps. They may also have acted it out. That's often a good idea. Later in the lesson, or perhaps in a subsequent lesson a day or two later, you can use this dialogue to focus on some pretty useful lexis. Words, expressions like have the chance, or by the way, or get in touch with someone, or indeed any other items that you might identify. So, take the dialogue and on a copy of your own, make some changes to the lexical content. Here you can see some changes that I've made. They're in yellow here, with the original words or phrases in brackets. Sometimes, though, I just scribble on top of the tape script in the teacher's book. And can I emphasize here straight away that these are just the items that I've decided to change. They're not the only possible ones. Now, in the lesson, ask your learners to open their books again to the dialogue and give them a time limit, for example, a minute, to read the dialogue again and try to commit as much of it as possible to their memory. Reassure them that they don't have to learn it by heart. Just read it, try to remember as much of it as they can in the time that you give them. After the time is up, tell them to close their books. Tell them you're going to read the dialogue aloud, but with these changes. If you prefer, you can say you're going to make mistakes. It's up to you. The student's task is to listen carefully, and when they hear you say something different from the original dialogue, they have to stop you and shout out the original or correct words. They might need a little help from you. For instance, you could slightly emphasize the wrong bits or pause briefly after you've said them. And that's the activity. My learners, especially teenagers, tend to like this activity very much because it kind of reverses the roles, and instead of me correcting them, they're correcting me. It's an activity which really helps learners to read and then to listen attentively, as well as helping them to remember some lexical items. Just a word about the changes you make. As I said before, there are no right or wrong items to choose for the changes, but I'd like to pass some tips. First of all, don't change too much. I like to choose maybe 6 or 8 items, something like that. Secondly, change some single word items and some multi-word items. Look for useful fixed phrases or collocations like one day or by the way. Thirdly, when you change multi-word items, try to change the whole item. Here's an example. In the dialogue here, the phrase "by the way" was changed. Imagine you change it to "in the way." When the learners correct you, they will only need to say the word "by." But it's much more useful for them to remember the whole chunk, "by the way." So change the chunk to, for example, "tell me." And then learners have to correct you by saying the whole chunk, "by the way." This activity requires minimal preparation, it's lots of fun, it gives students encouragement to read closely and to try to remember, and it's got a learning outcome. It's an activity that I've always liked very much indeed, and I hope you and your students will too.